Hello and welcome back to the Azeem Digital Asks all-round digital marketing podcast. I am super excited today to bring you my guest, Bernard Huang, absolute legend in the SEO game, someone who is very fortunate me, to share the stage with him at MozCon in Seattle earlier this year, but you've come here to listen, watch, and learn from him. So this is the bit where I am going to shut up. The last thing I'll say is that our topic of the episode, which I stupidly missed, that's how excited I am to talk to him today. The topic of this episode is we're going to talk about why SEO content must be engaging in the future. My friend Bernard, welcome to the show.
Azeem, thank you so much for having me and the warm welcomes. Like Azeem mentioned, we had the honor of sharing the stage at MozCon earlier this year, and I was blown away by Azeem's ability to wow and engage the crowd by doing all kinds of acrobatics on stage. And that's a good natural segue into why we need to make sure our content as being read by readers and searchers is engaging in that particular manner, right? Content needs to have some kind of to actually be relevant and stay relevant, especially as we enter this era of AI generated commodity crap that we all have been seeing flooding the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And before we dive into that, I just want to say on recording, because we just spoke about it now off the recording, a special thanks for doing this. So by the time this episode goes out, hopefully all of these tech and IT issues where Microsoft basically shut down the world for what it seemed like it's caused you to get stuck in Boston. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do this for me and the listeners and viewers. So thank you. Anyway, you mentioned about AI. Perfect place to start. We've been seeing a lot of stuff about AI overviews. Even very recently, it started to come out in the UK. I'm seeing them for certain healthcare queries. Just for those members of the audience who don't quite know yet what AI overviews are, what do they mean at the top of the SERPs? What are they? What do they mean at the top of the SERPs for brands and SEOs?
Yeah. So quick backstory. If you've been interested or looking at search, we've had a very turbulent couple of years since ChatGPT really took the world by storm. And ChatGPT, that magical artificial intelligence bot that you chat with that provides surprisingly good outputs for any sorts of questions or prompts that you end up giving it, is causing Google to have existential risk in that if searchers instead go to artificial intelligence and chatbots to get their questions answered, then what is the world that, Google search actually plays for the end user? So you see Google, I would say, trying a lot of different things. First, they called it Search Generative Experience, which was a Search Labs like feature that they added to their search engine results. And what it would do is that it would summarize or paraphrase the top ranking Google results for any given query and attempt to answer the question that the searcher is looking for any given search. From there, they since renamed it to AI overviews, and AI overviews are designed to sit on top of the search engine results page and give the answer to the question that somebody is searching for so that they don't necessarily need to click on another result or, perform an additional search.
Perfect. Love that. That's a perfect explanation. And thank you very much for sharing it. I have my own opinions, but I'll keep them to one side for now because we're here to listen and learn from you. So, how do you think that this, let's say, not so new feature will have an impact on, let's say, traditional SEO strategies?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this extensively, and I think that AI overviews are designed to change the search engine results page in a variety of different ways. And the main like piece of the main like way that I think that it's going to influence how searchers really approach their search is that I think the AI overview is going to answer the question from a pure like definitional sense in a lot of different queries that somebody might be searching for. So to give a more practical example, let's say that, you are interested in learning more about artificial intelligence. And, your first step in your journey to understanding, more about this topic of artificial intelligence is to definitely, perform the search artificial intelligence. In the past, what you would see is, 10 blue links that all more or less kind of say, what is artificial intelligence and why it matters and, how artificial intelligence works and all these different things. And you'd click into those search results to understand or learn more about the particular topic. But I think, with the advent of artificial intelligence overviews, what you're seeing is that Google is providing this top level definition of, what is AI, why it matters, how it works. And by the time the user is then looking at the rest of the search engine results, you can imagine their state of mind has been shifted away from wanting to know, the basics of what this topic is about and, the basics of why it matters. They're going to want to know, why you think it matters and how, that technology can be, used for the specific use cases that, it's performing well for. And so I think, long story short, the AI overview is going to answer the definitional and like high consensus answers that we all used to get from, reading the top 1, 2, or 3 results. And what we're going to start to see is that people need like wanting to consume content that's, more engaging and more relevant to their specific needs and, their specific research as they're investigating, the topic that they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think if I sidestep temporarily, um, I have what started off as deliberately, um, instead of change my search behavior. So instead of searching on Google for my requirements, I've been starting to use Gemini, for example, just to see and compare the type of answers that I'm getting, as opposed to very definitional versus things like, and I think you were kind of nodding onto like experience type content. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to. Now, by the way, I just deliberately, sorry, I don't deliberately, I just, without even thinking, I just started to use Gemini much more. Um, just because I want to try and get into that mindset of what search is like and how to understand it from a searcher's perspective. Because, personal opinion, I think sometimes marketers talk to marketers a lot, and maybe we market to marketers too much and we forget about the actual end user at the end. That's a story for another day. Anyway, back to experiences. That's something, excuse me, that's something that, I've heard you speak about before, and I think the audience would benefit from your perspective on what do you think Google's guidance is on experience rich content?
Yeah. So I think Google is preparing itself for this world where, you get your quick answer that is, the artificial intelligence output at the top of the SERP. And they're thinking, how do we as a search engine continue to stay relevant to searchers in a world where, search behavior is shifting as a result of, this AI world that we all live in. And I think that Google actually has a quality content problem, right? And I think that Google is guilty of causing this quality content problem for itself because of the way that the algorithm has traditionally worked, right? The algorithm traditionally was built on top of backlinks to start. Then they started really thinking about this idea of quality content from a knowledge graph or topic comprehensiveness standpoint. And the SEO world rallied around building out longer and longer content that had a higher likelihood of covering all of the relevant entities or subtopics that a topic should be about, to the point where anytime you start reading anything about, most of the common topics that people are searching for, you end up with this like overly optimized like SEO experience, right? You know this when you type in like diabetes or artificial intelligence or even, like top things to do in X city. And they all follow this very traditional template, if you will, where it's like, well, what is artificial intelligence? Why artificial intelligence matters? And the reasoning as to why all of this works is because Google's algorithm has prioritized and even emphasized, right, that longer content, more comprehensive content is just better for the end user. Then Google kind of gets slapped in the face with artificial intelligence, and they're forced to have this like wake up moment where they're realizing that actually, a lot of the searches that people are performing, they're actually getting, like unsatisfactory content experience. And instead, because in the past there was no alternative, you just had to deal with kind of crappy Google search results and you were like, yeah, okay. But now, right, there's this like X factor, which is GPT or Claude or Perplexity, or, you can choose whichever artificial intelligence technology you want to. And all of a sudden there is an alternative. And I think, Google's looking at that and say, well, that's a big problem because, in the past, people just had to come to us and they just had to accept that, the content that, we have is the best because that's just how it is. So now, right, because people can turn to these different ecosystems, Google says, wow, okay, we have a big quality content problem. And, what that is that people aren't really trusting, the content that we're surfacing to the end user because, we cannot verify that the person who wrote it actually knows what they're talking about. We can't, confirm that, the person, actually traveled to the location that, they're writing about. And so you see Google, I think, take its first scramble to fix a lot of these quality content issues by really boosting user-generated content, right? Like Reddit, Quora, and these different discussion boards, because, they look at that and they say, okay, well, that's engaging, that's relatable. These are, people who have the firsthand experience that matters for this particular topic, and we want more of that. But, they basically also at the same time, I think, are scrambling under the hood and saying like, well, how do we get more of that? And the problem is that, a lot of the SEO content world has been trained to say that type of content, that first-hand perspective-led, unique, engaging, original content is actually not rewarded in the SERP. And it has not been, right? It's been the SEO best practice, the SEO, templatized content that has been rewarded. And so I think Google is now scrambling and they're saying, okay, well, we don't have actually that many sources where people are producing high quality and first-hand experience content. So we have to like rely on, Reddit and these UGC sites. And meanwhile, right, Google, I think has a lot of propaganda, which they call EEAT, page quality ratings, and these kinds of things. And they're saying, hey, we want content that looks more like this. But at the end of the day, right, Google propaganda, I think, is many years ahead of Google execution. And so I think that's kind of left the content creation community kind of like like miffed and confused, right? Because they're like, well, you're saying you want this, but when I produce that, I'm not getting any results. So I end up reverting to, producing this cookie cutter SEO content because it works. And I think that, we're straddling, both ecosystems right now. And I think people are confused, right? Like, what does Google want? What do searchers want? And I think that there's just a very, very big, like, deficit of quality engaging content on the internet. And Google doesn't really have much to work with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And your point on perspectives has led me to my next question perfectly. So you've described it perfectly, but why do you think it's important for brands to focus on that perspective-led content now? If you're working with a brand or a company, you're sort of, let's say, selling this idea to them, what would you tell them? Why is it important?
Yeah. I've been having this thesis, and I think this thesis, I'm trying to build more evidence to confirm or deny it, but I think increasingly Google's algorithm is becoming a two-set algorithm. Now, let me describe what I mean by this two-set algorithm. I think that Gemini, which is Google's version of ChatGPT, and
Mm,
what is being leveraged, I think, to produce the AI overview, is one model, and then you have the rest of the search engine results page, which is going to be this other model. So in the past, when you optimized for Google, you were really only optimizing for the 10 blue links and the search engine results page. By doing that, obviously you got your traffic and your rankings, and, that produced revenue and leads for your business. I think that moving forward, what Google is doing is that it's saying that a huge set of like queries are essentially not worthwhile to send any traffic to. And these as, queries where featured snippets currently show up, right? If I'm
mm,
Googling how many legs does a dog have, or, how many feet in a meter, Google's just going to give me that exact response. They're going to say, like a dog has 4 legs, and here's
mm,
your answer. Those queries have stopped producing traffic for everybody, like many years ago. We know this if we say like blah, blah, blah definition, right? Google just whips out its Google dictionary and it says, here's here's synonyms to, terrific, or here's the definition to X. And
mm,
so I think what you have to realize as a brand is that a lot of the informational, definitional like type queries that you may have gotten traffic for in the past are at significant risk for producing traffic no more.
mm,
And that's because, right, Google's artificial intelligence is going to sit on top of the SERP and answer those kinds of queries in a way that satisfies tons of users. And I think, there's one set of people who say, okay, well, how do I, um, how do I train or be part of that training data to be part of the answer that, Google gives in the AI overview, and be one of the citations, right, that Google is going to like give to the user. And I think that that's one of the algorithms that I'm seeing happen in this, two split algorithm. I think my main question there is that, does it even make sense to try to optimize to become the AI overview when the whole goal of the AI overview is literally to answer the searcher's question with them performing no additional actions?
mm. Yeah.
And, right, if you really think about it in that lens, it's almost kind of foolish, right, to try to influence that particular, like be a part of that answer box, because the whole goal of that answer box is that the user finds what they need and they don't click into your site or do anything. Okay, so if that's like one algorithm, then we have to ask ourselves, what's the other algorithm really trying to prioritize and look for? And that's where, this concept of perspectives and user engagement and unique content and information gain come in play, right? Google is saying, okay, if we're going to answer the question that the user has at a surface level as quickly as possible, then, we have to ask ourselves, what is the content that lives below the fold that Google wants to give users and users actually want to click into? And therefore, when they click into it, they're visiting your website, and that's value add. And I think that content is going to look, very closely to what we know as, what's showing up on Reddit and Quora, right? And it's this unique firsthand experience that is engaging. And so I think that, that's essentially the future that Google is setting up. And they're saying, okay, the content below needs to actually be unique, interesting, engaging, and, value add. But currently, again, we don't actually have that much of it. And so we're relying on Reddit to fill that gap. And we're using our propaganda to influence how we as contributors to the internet produce our content. And so hopefully in a year or 2 years, Google can have, more unique original content that lives below the fold that is, perspective rich and really, gives searchers something that they want to click into.
Yeah, I love that. And no notes. That's perfectly explained. You made me think though, and I'm sure the listeners and viewers might naturally arrive at this question themselves at this point in the show. I won't give any specific example because I don't want to deliberately lead you down a path, but where brands are in a space that's, let's say, quite crowded, they all offer the same service or product. How can these brands create content that would meet this sort of new criteria from Google, but then also stand out from their competitors?
Yeah, I think this is where I would like the first answer that comes to mind is really just first principles marketing, right? And what I mean by that is that, if you were to think about your marketing in terms of trying to put your product or service in front of your ideal customer profile with the messaging and positioning that resonates with them, that's exactly how I think search engine optimization should be shifted into the approach, right? So let's say you're Nike as an example, and that, running shoes is a important product category for you to serve to your end user. Well, if you're thinking about running shoes, you have these different personas of, customers that you believe are your ideal customer profile. And this can be, your soccer mom who is too busy, living their identity, as a parent, a working, parent, a parent who has small children, a loving significant other. And, how does this, soccer mom, what are her needs and her desires? And, it's probably that she wants, functional shoe wear that can be worn on and off, the practice. And so, her lifestyle is athletic because she needs to be, performant at, every stage in every phase of her life. And so if that is the case, then you can start to imagine content pieces that match, what the soccer mom might want to be purchasing. Could be things like, great looking shoes for everyday wear. And that just happens to be, a running shoe that can fit that model, or, how to care for your everyday wear, knowing that, your life is kind of all over the place. And, when you start to think about content creation to mirror, right, your ideal customer profiles and the jobs, that they have, that they need to be done, and the questions and problems that they're thinking about, then you start to create content that, kind of has this flavor of like, I know you and I understand that these are your problems. And, here's a content piece that I've written to answer that particular problem. And I think that the world of content is increasingly becoming this very fractured and disjointed experience, right? And, somebody who is the soccer mom who's looking for shoes isn't going necessarily to want to just Google like best running shoes, right? They're going to be like, oh, I want active shoe wear for an active lifestyle. And then, like if there's a content piece, it's just like 20 of the best, like everyday footwear for busy parents. They're going to click on that and they're going to say, well, that seems way more relevant and engaging to me than just like best running shoes. And, Google already has all this psychodemographic data on us as users of Google. And they're going to start to say, okay, well, if, Anne is searching, why we would just give her that rather than a generic best running shoes. So I think if you're a brand, I think it starts to become, how do you create content that is unique to your ideal customer profiles where, you're answering questions that they have that are actually meaningful to the way that they're researching and evaluating, their options and their products and services.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that example was perfect because you didn't even know. I literally performed that same search earlier today and I was served content. It's like they knew what I was looking for. So I have a concern which I didn't Google, which is about the durability and length of life of running shoes. So I just performed a couple of Google searches on that, happened upon a couple of brands, and the one that I stayed with led with the strapline was something like long-lasting shoes designed to run X amount of miles, and immediately I've got the proof. And underneath it was like an actual human, not an AI, but their own experience with it, their own photo holding the trainers saying, I've covered X amount of miles, I'm sold, I'm going to stay. That's exactly as you described it, just perfect. So thank you very much for sharing that. We are absolutely flying through this episode. I've got a couple more for you and then I can let you get on your way and enjoy the rest of your day. I would be a fool if we didn't get this far and I didn't give you the opportunity to share some examples of maybe some of your own work that's had some success in leveraging perspective-led content. Do you have any examples of those that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think that perspective-led content is varies in mileage. I'll just start with that asterisk as we get into it. I think that when we're talking about more of the consumer-related searches, you're starting to see a lot more perspective content start to enter the fold, right? These are things where it's like saying how Google AMP is going to die or should be eliminated. And I mean, this was years ago where Google AMP, which is short for accelerated mobile pages, right? This was an experiment that Google had where they gave publishers the ability to publish content onto Google servers. And by publishing content on the Google servers, you basically got an almost instantaneous delivery of your content to be served to whoever might want to consume the content. A lot of SEOs subscribe to this idea, even though they may not necessarily be publishers, because the whole idea was that you would decrease your page load time to close to zero, right? Since Google is serving the content, it would almost be immediate. The significant downside to doing this was multifold, but number one is extraordinarily complicated to actually syndicate the content correctly to Google. And number two, the content was hosted by Google, right? And so the way that you would track the content would become this really weird way because you wouldn't get the event to fire on your own servers because they would fire on Google servers. Long story short, it was kind of a really bad like execution across the board by everybody, and Google AMP decided to shut down, I think like a year or two ago. But leading up to it, if you Googled Google AMP, you would actually see content pieces showing up that is like Google AMP is dying, or like should you do Google AMP? Like the short answer is no. And like these, or Google AMP is dead. Like don't do Google AMP. And these results would show up on Google AMP because, and I think it's because of the user engagement signal that Google has become so heavily dependent on, right? Google says, okay, we're going to try this. And if a lot of people are clicking on it and finding what they're looking for by not going back to Google and performing an additional search, Google just has to believe that whatever was on that page is actually good and satisfying the user, regardless of, again, whatever is on that page. And so when Google started to really depend highly on user engagement signal was when you started to see this disintermediation of traditional SEO, backlinks, keywords just get wiped away. Because right at the end of the day, if you were, say, WebMD and you produced a mega piece of content with high authority and Google tried it and it was just ultimately a very crappy experience, then Google would demote that in favor of, a more perspective-led and engaging piece of content that didn't follow the traditional like SEO playbook. So yeah, I've been on kind of a path to calling this out for, I think, like the last 5 years. Back then, I've been calling it ranch style SEO, which is just a play on skyscraper technique, where if the skyscraper was a 5,000, 10,000 word article on the ultimate guide on, running or whatever, ranch style SEO was kind of saying that you should be as broad and kind of like, little doses, because that's actually a better fit for the user, right? Instead of like, what is running, why running is important, and have that be in one piece, you should take that and turn it into, like 20 different pieces on, like what is running, how to run as somebody who has never ran, how to run, how to like level up your running if you've already been running for a little bit, right? Basically slicing it all up and presenting the user on these little bits. I think to start, it kind of then like people called it, okay, like, the topic cluster, or like pursuing long tail keywords, or you've probably heard of this idea of a zero search volume keywords.
Yeah.
And I think all of these are all nods towards this model that Google has really pushed us into, which is user engagement centric, right? And so I think Google's algorithm is heavily dependent on user engagement signal, which is why this whole idea of perspective-led content even works to begin with, right? If you can actually just produce a piece of content that is on the right perspective and it's just more forward thinking, yeah, there's no reason why, you can't rank. I wish I had more like live practical examples I could share with you from my own experience. We're about to, conduct a lot of tests across the board on this. But I think that, the long story short of it is that for consumer driven searches, you're already seeing it happen. If you Google, something diet or, this, consumer related search, you're going to see all these things that are like 7 things I wish I knew before starting the keto diet, or, like don't do the Atkins diet, like there's all these things that are already happening. And consumer related searches also have the added advantage of having way more testing data that Google can rely on to reinforce user engagement signal in, a unique and interesting way that B2B searches typically do not have as much of, right? Because they're more niche, they're more long tail, and there's just less testing data that Google has. So they have to rely more on the traditional domain authority, topical authority
Yeah.
models
Yeah.
that have been, how they've been approaching it.
Perfect. Two things. All I was going to say was, excuse me, if you're running tests, we absolutely must get you back on the show to talk about the outcomes of them. You've answered my last question on the show perfectly, so I've literally got one more question for you. But you were speaking about testing, so before I ask you the question, I've been doing like an unofficial test, and by the time this episode comes out, I'd love to like do a sort of semi-live, pre-recorded one with you. For me, like we were talking about running a lot, my smartwatch says I need to get more sleep in order to recover better. Now, for me, I have no problem falling asleep. I just have a problem with the duration of it. So I start to Google how to get more sleep. The SERPs that I see all have information about how to fall asleep, which are inherently two different things. And I've seen that across all the hours under the sun, even on the SERP itself. If you, after this recording now, wherever in the world you are, or when this comes out, just search how to get more sleep and then just have a scan and see if the results tell you about how to get more sleep or how to actually fall asleep and like stay asleep. Nothing to do with the duration at all. So we'll do an unofficial test, and in 2 weeks' time when this comes out, we'll see if the SERPs have improved. I can tell you for a fact now, Gemini is awful at it. It will tell you about reducing screen time, etc., etc. That's how to fall asleep. It won't tell you how to get longer sleep. Anyway, that's my boring bit over. The last question I want to ask you, just to round out the show, is if you could just sort of don your hat, your wizard's hat that you had on for MozCon. If you didn't see images of Bernard on stage, you absolutely must, because he was amazing. Now that AI is becoming much more prominent, it's everywhere. What do you think the future of search is now AI is prominent? It doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In your opinion, what's the future for us?
Yeah, I think the future is fractured. That's the best simple message that I can I can tell you. It's recognizing that search search is just one channel amongst many channels that people will choose to do research and get information, right? I think at the start of the internet, there was Google search and there was social media. And, now there's YouTube, now there's TikTok, now there's artificial intelligence, and, there's going to be, I would say, plenty more. And the disintermediation of search is happening, but all of this is normal, right? Just in the same way that in the past we used to get our news through newspaper or radio or television. And I mean, does anyone actually really get their news through radio these days? It's probably some people, but it's very, very low. And so I think that, my message is that fracture is happening, right? And I think that with the advent of artificial intelligence, I think we are seeing the biggest cannibalization of Google searches that has happened since Google search has launched, right? I think we've seen many cannibalizations where people will no longer search for, finance symbols as much. They'll just go to their stocks application. They won't really Google weather as much because they'll just go to their weather application. They won't really Google as much, like product related things. They'll just go to Amazon. They won't really Google as much, like how to or leisure related stuff. They might just go to YouTube. And so recognizing that the form of consumption of content is rapidly changing, and kind of setting yourself up for thinking of content more as an orchestration rather than, a singular channel by channel. And so when you produce content, I think it's increasingly important to think about, what is the distribution channel for this content? And also, like how do you slice and dice it in a way that, makes it easily shareable on TikTok or YouTube or, email newsletter or X or LinkedIn or all
Mm.
of these different things. And, also being, scraped by artificial intelligence so that your content's being used to train, AI models. Like all of this is happening at record scale. And I would say you have to be prepared for, a multi-channel future and recognize that content formats are continuing to evolve. And I think that, you should likely be very pro AI, because I think the technology is game changing. And
Mm.
I do think that, future generations may no longer search in the way that we grew up searching. I think that search could just be, right, going to Perplexity or Gemini and,
Mm.
asking them to do the search for us. And so, right, if that is the world that we're going into, instead of kind of being cautious or poo-pooing on the new stuff, I think you gotta embrace it. And that's to say that, if you didn't embrace TV or radio or the internet, when all of these things happened, you you lost, quite a bit. And so I think that the future is multi-channel, and we gotta just stay on top of our need to experiment and test different channels and different content formats.
Love that. Perfect. No notes. The future is multi-channel. Perfect way to round out the episode. Thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and experience with the listeners and viewers. Just before I let you go, again, I would be a fool if I didn't give you the opportunity to share your details in terms of where people can find you, follow you. How can people connect with you and say thank you for sharing some really cool stuff today with us?
Yeah, well, I would say these days it seems like LinkedIn is where the party is at. So you can find me at slash Bernard J. Huang on LinkedIn. We also have a newsletter for ClearScope. It's clearscope.io/newsletter. And that's to say that back to the multi-channel thing. Yeah, Twitter or X, I think, is kind of going through its moments. But ultimately, I think, owning your own audience through email subscription is still the tried and true. And
Mm.
so I highly recommend that if you have not been building your own list and your own audience that is owned by you, that getting that started as quickly as possible is by far the best thing that you can do. Realizing that if you spent a decade on building a following on Twitter, that could be all taken away from you in the blink of an eye. And,
Mm.
having that kind of dependency on a singular channel, I think is really, quite a big risk, especially as your company grows into a bigger and bigger brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Thank you so much. Honestly can't thank you enough. When I come back to edit this, I'm literally going to be nodding away again furiously as I have been. That about wraps up another great episode. Again, a massive thank you to Bernard for giving up his his time to share his knowledge and wisdom with us. Remember, the future of search is multi-channel, so don't forget that. As always, please do like, rate, share, and subscribe. And if at the very least you could just go and connect with Bernard and say thank you so much for sharing some really, really cool stuff with us. I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure you will too. That about wraps it up. Please do join us for the next episode. And if you enjoyed it, please do say thank you to Bernard and share it with your friends. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and then tell that friend to tell somebody else. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.